common good. What is it and why does it matter to Catholics? We'll find out and talk about that and more now on Finding Communion. Hello, welcome to Finding Communion. I'm Rosemary Ford, editor of Parable Magazine. I'm here with Bob Dunn, the director of public policy for the Diocese of Manchester. This podcast and the Parable column of the same name discuss the church's work in the public square and the intersection of politics and faith. As I mentioned, today we're here to talk about the common good, a cornerstone of Catholic social teaching and also American democracy. So, Bob, what do we mean by the common good? What exactly is that?
From a Catholic social teaching perspective, the common good is one of the four pillars of that teaching. The common good, human dignity, solidarity, and subsidiarity. I think of the common good as being the principle that we look to the interests of others, especially the poor, and to the interests of the community before we look to our own self-interest.
That makes sense. So how would you apply the common good in Catholic social teaching, for example?
The church sees that things like basic human rights are part of the common good. Food, shelter, healthcare. The church thinks about the dignity of work and workers under this principle. Care for creation. Pope Francis calls climate a common good, which it obviously is when you think about it.
True, yeah.
So it is a very broad look at what life is like and how we are trying to help all of our fellow members of society, but in particular, and this is really an important part of the way that the church looks at the common good, in particular, those who are poor.
That makes sense. How does this apply to American democracy? Because you see the common good, pop up a lot there as well.
It's a great point. One of the things that I find myself reminding people in Concord of quite a bit is the fact that the common good is not just a religious principle, but it is one of the cornerstones of our American republic. The U.S. Constitution starts off with a preamble that says that one of the reasons that the government was being founded, the constitutional government was being founded, was in order to promote the general welfare. And here in New Hampshire, Part 1, Article 1 of our state constitution, so right at the outset, says that government is instituted for the general good. And so these are really important things to remember. We often think of the revolutionary and the founding generation as being all about rugged individualism. But what they really were about was establishing a community, a republic, where people were going to have individual responsibilities towards the greater good.
How do you know that what you're doing is part of the common good? I mean, is it a matter of perspective about whether you're operating, in a way that's consistent with that, or how does that work exactly?
I think that you need to really keep in mind what the end goal is. If you're approaching an issue with the purpose of trying to help others, and especially the poor, then you're going to be on a pretty good path toward knowing that your action is dedicated to the common good.
That makes a lot of sense. So, Bob, how would the principle of the common good interact with individual rights, right? Because sometimes if you're, looking at the needs of the many, sometimes the needs of the few can be ignored. And that's something that's also come up in our own democracy. That's why we have a House and a Senate, right? To keep the tyranny of the majority in check. So can you speak a little bit about that and how that works?
I think of the way that our culture looks at the issue of individual rights as being like a stereo speaker turned all the way over. The balance is turned all the way over in one direction. Mm-hmm. Now, if you turn that knob all the way over in the other direction, you have this very authoritarian, statist way of looking at the way that life should be. The state is going to make decisions about how everybody should operate.
The collective is everything.
Exactly. Catholic social teaching, to my mind, puts that balance right between those two extremes.
Right? Because if you're at the other extreme, you're in anarchy, basically, right? It's everyone out there for themselves.
Exactly. So we have, one of the things that we have to offer as Catholics is the perspective that there is a balance to be struck between the rights of the individual and the communal obligations that we have. That's a balance that I think was one that the founding generation of our state and our country were trying to strike. Didn't always work. And we've seen that over the course of time, over the last couple of 100 years, that even though this body politic was founded with the principle of the common good in mind, that isn't always the way it has turned out in practice, either in the way that the government has acted or in the way that we as citizens have acted. Mm-hmm. But it's the aspiration that we have, and it's bringing that balance back into effect so that it's not turned all the way over so far that we forget our obligations to the wider community.
That makes a lot of sense. And thank you for that uncommonly good discussion. Thank you for joining us on Finding Communion. Please check out our show notes for more on this topic, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.